Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 13 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. On this week's episode, AJ and I show you 3 filters you can apply to evaluate the effectiveness of your church's ministries and programs. Many churches operate out of habit and tradition, rarely taking a closer look to make sure that their ministries are actually moving the church forward. Today you'll learn why evaluation is so important and how you can systematically determine if a program is healthy, unhealthy, or needs some adjustment by applying 3 specific filters. To read today's show notes, visit malfersgroup.com/13. That's the number 13. If you like today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends in ministry. Now, let's dive in.
All right, so today we're talking about assessing our ministries. We want to always make sure that what we're doing is effective, Scott. So I really like this topic, and it's something that it doesn't get thought of, I think, often enough, especially in like the daily grind of church life. Mm-hmm. It's just, people don't wake up, leaders don't wake up every day and they're like, how am I going to assess my ministries today?
Yeah.
It has to be brought to the consciousness, mm-hmm. and it has to be planned that we're going to think about it. It has to be planned when we're going to, look at mm-hmm. the results of our ministries. So, that's why I think it's great that we're talking about it today. Hopefully, at least today, we're going to raise it to that consciousness for our listeners.
Yeah, we often will tell churches that we work with that, the shelf life for a ministry is like 3 to 5 years. And churches will kind of like balk at that a little bit and be like, wait a minute, so you're saying I got to ditch all of my ministries within 3 to 5 years? And no, we're not saying that you got to get rid of it, but you've got to be really taking a hard look at how effective it is, at least that often, if not more often than every 3 to 5 years. And, a lot of the churches that we're talking to, and maybe this is your church if you're listening, there's probably ministries in your church that haven't gotten a hard look in 15 years, 20 years, 50 years. So it's time to evaluate the effectiveness of those ministries. And AJ, I just appreciate the article that you've written on this topic that goes along with this episode, which, by the way, is at malfersgroup.com/13. That's the show notes for today. And AJ, great job writing this article. And today we want to break down and give more detail and nuance to this idea of evaluating and how to evaluate and assess the effectiveness of programs and ministries. So without much further ado, AJ, you ready to hop straight in on how to do this?
Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's break it down. Because, and let me just say one more thing before we do that, just to make sure that people understand kind of the importance of this. And that's that, there's a lot of churches that the pastor's like, hey, that was I preached a killer sermon again this Sunday. That's always cool. Our Sunday schools are doing pretty good. People are studying God's word. And on Wednesday nights, we had like 20 people show up for prayer meetings. So church is covered in prayer. But we can't just leave the same things, the same basic operations happening. Preach a sermon, maybe have some Sunday school time, and call it a day. And so that's what the assessment begins to do for us. We've got to remember that we're trying to help people become mature in their faith. Ephesians 4 is a passage that I put in the article this week, so that the point is that the body of Christ would be built up till we reach unity and maturity. And that's what we get when we start assessing and evaluating what we're doing in the church to make sure that that is the end result of what our actions are.
I think another point here too, AJ, before we start talking about how to assess, is that you just laid out sort of a traditional model of Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night type deal. But I'd be shocked if most of the churches that are listening today are only doing those 3 things. In fact, if that were the case, they might actually be doing okay. But my guess would be a lot of churches are doing significantly more than that. Their calendars are a lot more full. And so when we talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, AJ, but when we start talking about assessing the effectiveness of ministries and programs, we're not just talking about those banner programs that Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We're talking about The whole kit and caboodle, everything that's on your calendar.
Yeah, I probably could have titled this "How to Eliminate Fluff." So, because you're absolutely right. Because there's been a million and one great ideas over the years in churches, and they've implemented them. And sometimes those things now have stuck around for a long time. So, really, I mean, more of the point of this is to help you weed through some of that stuff and make sure that what you're doing has a point and it has a good result.
Yeah.
So,
and to peek ahead a bit to next week, we're going to talk about once you've identified those things that maybe you shouldn't keep doing anymore, how do we end some ministries that shouldn't stick around? But we're not going to talk about that today. First, we got to figure out how you would know what is the fluff? What is it we should get rid of? And so let's dive straight in then. AJ, tell me a little bit. We've got 3 checkpoints that we're going to walk you through today, that as you're sort of assessing your ministries and evaluating them, and are they effective? And so let's start with this first checkpoint that you've identified, AJ, which is mission. So what does it mean to put a ministry or a program or an event through the mission filter?
Yeah. So for some of you listening, you're like, yeah, of course. And for others, maybe this is going to be a nice reminder that we kind of have a really major thing that we're supposed to be doing as a church. Our primary mission is the Great Commission. We should be making and maturing disciples of Jesus Christ. That's what the church is here to do. There's lots of great things that the church does do and should be doing. But if you're going to keep the main thing, making disciples is it. And so, we talk about that being a filter. So in anything that we're doing as a church now, or any great ideas that we have to ask, does this help us achieve our mission of making, some person hearing possibly for the first time the name of Jesus and understanding what that means, the implications of that gospel message, or somebody who is a believer and helping them mature in their faith, so that, again, we've got to point to this, so that they become a disciple maker themselves. And so this is the main thing in the church. So this has got to be our filter. If we're doing things that we can't easily find the point A to point B connection between what we're doing and that being the result, then we quite possibly might be ineffective in what we're doing.
Yeah, it feels like this is almost like a gut check question.
Oh,
I mean, we're going to apply some more detailed lenses here in a minute, but this is just sort of the initial binary yes or no question. Is this actually helping us make, and or mature disciples? And I think lots of churches, AJ, I know in my experience in working with them, the reason why that program still exists is because someone likes it.
Yeah.
And so I think the tendency is to say, yeah, it does. But I mean, you got to start getting really honest, right? And start going, really though, is this really helping us make disciples? And how can you as a pastor, AJ, help a church think about that more objectively and honestly, and not just want to just assume that because the church is doing it, that yes, it does help make and mature disciples? How can you help a church take an honest look in the mirror and say, is this really helping us?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, that might be a healthy way of going about that, maybe in, at least a small team environment. So pulling together some people that maybe have some different perspectives, people that work in the ministry, that we want their perspective, but they may not be the most objective. So we definitely want people that are at least familiar with it and have observed the ministry from the outside, other leaders in the church. So I think that's a great way of doing it. But we've got to ask for the evidence. I mean, where's the evidence? Let's talk about what does this ministry do? What's the function of it? Who participates in it? How does it work? And what is the end result of it?
Yeah.
And so if the end result is not either directly making or maturing disciples, or indirectly with maybe only one additional step, or pointing them into something else that is making that function happen, then I think it needs to be possibly reworked. And of course, this gets into, again, next week's podcast when we talk about what to do with ministries that aren't making the grade. But I think that's it. We've got to look at what's the result of this ministry.
I can remember specifically working with one church. This happens, I think, with some regularity, but I have one instance in my mind. When we're working with a church through the discipleship pathway process, as you know, AJ, we have churches list out everything that they do. We
Mm-hmm.
call it, or I like to call it, the Great Church Garage Clean Out.
Yeah.
You basically, you're taking everything out of the garage, the ministry garage, so to speak. And we're going to create a new system for arranging it. But the first thing you have to do is you got to pull everything out. And so I can remember this specific instance of a church. We have them write every single ministry on an individual Post-it note, so we can rearrange them and do things with them later on. But this particular church, they had written everything out, and I was putting them on Post-it notes, and I was calling it out as we were just going through our initial filter, AJ. And I called this one thing out, and I'd say there were I think maybe 20 people in the room, and out of the 20 people, only 2 people knew what that ministry actually was.
Yeah.
18 people had no idea that ministry even existed in the church, and only 2 people knew what it was, and they had to explain it. Like, those are the kinds of things that are happening in churches all the time. There's all kinds of ministry happening in your church. You as the pastor, you might not even know everything that's happening in the church. And so this first initial gut check question also requires that you have a good list, right? Of what's even happening in your church.
Yes, there's a lot of times we run into that. I know you have too, Scott, that we ask them for a list of their ministries. They're like, oh, okay, well, that's going to take a little time to come up with that.
Right. They don't even know.
That might be maybe a first red flag. If there's so much going on that you're like, well, we're going to have to really sit down and figure that out, then you probably have too much going on.
AJ and you and I both worked with a church that, I don't know if you remember this, but it was a church of about 200-ish people, and they had, when they made their list, they had, I think, 120 different things that they did. And so think about that. That was like almost one ministry per average attender. That's crazy. Yeah. So it's not uncommon. Okay, let's move on. So checkpoint number 1 is apply this mission filter, just that gut check question. Does this help us make and mature or mature disciples? So checkpoint number 2, AJ, you have listed as the discipleship pathway filter. What does that mean to apply a pathway filter to when you're assessing ministries?
Yeah, this is definitely kind of our next level. Whenever you're looking at a holistic, healthy church, I mean, that church is on mission. That church has a clear way for people to mature in their faith. And then I won't give away number 3 yet, Scott. But for discipleship pathway. So this is where, as I've stated in here, this is kind of where all the ministry lives. That's going on in the church, and in a healthy environment, it's understandable and it's broken down into not more than a small handful of steps. That we're taking people from hearing the gospel, connecting in the church, maturing in their faith, and becoming disciple makers. However your church might want to state that. Know, grow, go, I don't know, show up, connect, serve out there. Whatever your terminology is fine. But that's what we're talking about with discipleship pathway. So, but this is where our ministries live. So the ministries that are inside of these steps, again, they've got to have a point to them. They've got to be pointing people into their next, as you like to say, Scott, the next best thing that they should be doing to mature in their faith. And so that has to become our next filter. Where does this ministry fit in the discipleship pathway? So if we have our second level step is kind of our maturing step, maybe, growing in our knowledge of God's word, something to that effect. Well, okay, what ministries have we put into that category, and are they achieving that goal or not? So that's why.
So that leads to my follow-up question, which is how do you know where a program fits? So let's say we've defined a series of steps. Let's just say it's know, grow, go, which is, Baptist church might really love that rhyming scheme there, AJ. But how do we know? How do we sort programs? So if we're using this analogy again of a great garage clean out, so we've now created a new system for organizing the garage. We've got the know, the grow, the go sort of shelves inside the garage. How do we begin to put things back according to that system?
Yeah. Well, we would definitely want to take a look and figure out what are the primary ministries of our church. So everything can't be primary. We've got to whittle this list down to the things that are primary, and that will fit inside these categories. Our worship service is going to be a primary ministry. That's always kind of a given. I like that as an entry point in trying to explain this to a church. So we know we're doing a Sunday morning worship service. That's going to be a primary ministry of the church. But what are we trying to accomplish in that? So once that's determined, then that is likely going to be, the first step in our discipleship pathway.
Right. So that goes back to last week's episode where we talked about designing outcomes, right? So if we've got a step, we've got an outcome designed for that step. So then when we start looking and evaluating that program, we're evaluating it, correct, AJ, through the lens of that outcome. Correct.
And as a part of our process, of course, we have already worked through core values, which, don't want to get in the weeds on that necessarily today. But whenever you introduce, what are the core values of our church and how do we make them actionable, we end up filling those into the steps of our discipleship pathway.
Right.
And of course, for we at TMG really believe in the values of the first century church in Acts 2. And so that makes a really nice and clean way of having action-oriented steps to maturity in the church. So we would use those also as components of our discipleship pathway, which becomes, much more clear filters. Are we helping people be worshipers? We help them to be in prayer and to be in service and to be evangelistic and to be fellowshipping and serving and being generous. So those become a little bit more maybe granular filters inside our discipleship pathway to determine whether the ministry there is, again, accomplishing what it's set out to do.
Yeah. I've got an interesting question for you. It's one that I get a lot, AJ, and I'm curious. I don't know that I've ever asked you to know how you respond to this question, because I'm sure you get it too. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, hit me.
Can't churches just do things for fun?
No,
I mean, this sounds like a lot of work, to just say, okay, we're going to start paring down ministries and really evaluating them. Are they making and maturing disciples? Are you saying, and I'm asking this kind of facetiously, but I get this question a lot, which is, can't we just do things just to do things? Can't we just do things for fun? And it's a well-intentioned question.
Yeah. But
I'm interested, AJ, how do you answer that when a church asks that when we're going through this discipleship pathway process?
Yeah, and I have kind of two opposite answers, based on what perspective or what hat I want to put on for it. Because part of me wants to go, no, don't do anything for fun. Everything has a purpose, But goodness gracious, I mean, we have such an amazing, we have a joyful God, and in a relational God, and so you know what? I think it's fine just to do something for fun. What we don't want to do. Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you want to hear how I respond to that question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, the assumption is if we're doing things in the church, like Sunday morning, the question behind that question is these other things aren't fun. Why? Why can't Sunday morning not be boring? Why should our groups just be a bore? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's a great point. Well, why? How come you're not having fun doing these other things and filling up your fun bucket with useful things? Is that your point?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So that'd be point one.
Yeah.
Point two, and what I typically will say is, it is not my responsibility as a pastor, as a leader, as a church collectively, for me to fill your social calendar. That is not my job.
True. I totally agree.
You can do that yourself. You don't need, if you want to throw a baby shower or go have a dinner party or go hang out, have a picnic in the park.
Yeah.
You don't need me to A, give you permission, or B, plan it for you, and C, fund it.
Right.
You can do all of those things with your church friends on your own. It doesn't have to be organized, but I am not your party planning committee.
Yeah, so I kind of see the answer to this question changing as the size of the church changes or the structure of the church changes to some extent. So if you're a church of 70 people and you've got, 2 Sunday school classes or something, and everybody kind of already knows each other, and you're like, hey, yeah, in the spring, we just do just a family fun day. I would say don't put a penny into it. Announce the date and the place. And
really, I would do none of that. I mean, I'm like, act like the church you want to be, not the one you are.
I guess I just don't have
you got to step outside of that.
But but beyond that, it becomes it has less of a point, because when you're a church of 600 and you're like, let's have family fun day, what do you end up with? Small groups of people gathered together because they know each other already, because they're probably in Sunday school together or small group together. And for that reason, then I would say stop doing it, because people are already doing that together, or they could organize their own thing. So
unless you're doing like family fun day and it's an outreach and you're inviting community families to come and you're connecting with them, that'd be something different entirely.
Right. And at that point, I would say, well, you're not just doing that for fun. You're doing that because it has a purpose to make disciples, and therefore it goes back to previous point, and that's perfectly great, and you should be doing it. So
I think the takeaway that I'm getting from this little dialogue, AJ, is that I'm much stricter on churches than you are.
You are. Maybe you are.
So if you ever call the Malphurs group, who do you want? Do you want good cop or bad cop? That's those are your. We've got others on the
clear proof that we don't plan out everything we say prior to a podcast.
How much of this will make it into the final cut? I don't know, but my perspective is act like the church you want to be, not like the one you are.
Yeah.
You know, when you go buy shoes for your kids, you don't buy them shoes that fit them exactly. You give them wiggle room. And so same thing, like you've got to give a little bit of wiggle room and stop doing some of these things. Like the reason why these things aren't effective is because they're crowded out by all the things you think are just fun. And we're not able to focus on what really matters.
Yeah. So I guess I'm giving a little bit more rope, but with the caveat that you cannot let this get out of control. This has got to be, you've got to keep a strict rein still on what you're doing, and keeping the main thing.
Yeah. So just to clarify, because we've really gone off on a tangent here, AJ. The second filter is the discipleship pathway filter, and we're trying to categorize everything that our church is doing according to steps, and everything we do has to fit into a step. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay. So it's not like it's not like we've got the church, everything the church does, and part of that is the discipleship pathway, correct? Like the discipleship pathway encompasses everything that the church.
That's right. Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
All right. Checkpoint number 3, our third and final checkpoint, is vision. So let's tell me a little bit about applying a vision filter when we're talking about assessing a ministry's effectiveness.
Yeah. So, our mission filter is kind of broad. We're, making mature disciples. And our vision filter, from some perspectives, people might say, well, that's also very broad. Others might look at it, depending on what you've put out there, and it actually gets really specific. Mm-hmm. But as we work through the ministries that are going to help us achieve our discipleship pathway goals of maturity and disciple making, we also have got to be operating under this kind of big, hairy, audacious goal. If you want to go back to the BHAG thing of what's the long-term thing that we're trying to do as a church? And we teach, when we talk about vision, we teach the greater level of specificity in that. Yeah. And we teach it in kind of 3 ranges as well, more of a long-term, a mid-range, and then a shorter-term vision components. But especially in the short term, there's like specific goals that we're working towards, or specific outcomes that we're working towards. And the ministries of our church should be not only achieving like their individual goals or functions, but also driving us towards something, towards a greater accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And so that's where vision plays in. If your church hasn't taken the time to really explore where you're headed as a church. We talk about vision as being a destination. If you're not really, and it can't just be, to show the love of God to the world. You're probably doing that now to some extent. So, do you really want to say, hey, mission accomplished or vision accomplished? No, it's got to have something else out there that you're doing, something more specific that you're driving towards. If you can call it a day today on vision, then, I mean, why are we coming in tomorrow morning? You know, I mean, why are we unlocking the doors next Sunday? There's got to be something that we're working towards that we haven't achieved yet, that we've got to have God partnering with us on or leading us on, so that we finally get there.
Yeah. What's interesting, your ministries, if you think about your church like an airplane, okay? Your ministries are either, engines that are creating lift for you, or they're luggage and they're creating weight, holding you down. And the balance is, if you're all engine, you're not carrying anybody anywhere, right? But if it's all luggage, you're not getting anything off the ground. And so finding that balance between, luggage and engines when it comes to your ministries is really important. It's not easy. I mean, I don't think we should be talking about this like, well, here's these 3 checkpoints, bing, bang, boom.
Yeah,
right. But you've really got to strike that balance, right? Between, is this driving us forward? Are we carrying people where it is that we want to go, or are we carrying a whole bunch of dead weight and we're never going to be able to get anywhere if we keep doing all the things we've been doing?
Yeah, right. People have to have goals. I mean, I think it's human nature. When we see something out in front of us that we want to accomplish, then we work towards accomplishing it. You know, I mean, I think that's the nature of most humans to some extent.
Yeah.
And of course, we all have our roles to play in life and in ministry. And so, but we've got to keep that vision out there. It really is vitally important that your team takes the time to really explore that and to express that. It's got to be communicated well and constantly.
Yeah.
To help people, drive the church forward, doing the things that you should be doing.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too, and something to keep in mind, is that moving forward in vision, if you're a church that's really struggled, oftentimes it looks like just breaking things down into a series of smaller goals that you can achieve. You still should set out that big sort of vista goal, big, hairy, audacious goal, Jim Collins language there. But those 1-year goals should be things you feel like you can do. It's still driving you forward, but it's something that we can actually do. AJ, have you ever been to Great Sand Dune National Park?
Yeah, in Colorado?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was a kid.
Okay. I was in high school. I went there, and it was real hot. We were there in the summertime. And I don't know if you've ever been, if you're listening and you've ever been there, you know that most people only ever make it to like the top of the first big dune there. No one is going on a real long hike. But to get up to just the top of that first dune is a bit of a trek because it's really high up. And I remember I got this, I had bought a Gatorade at like a 7-Eleven, and I really wanted to get to the top of that first dune just so I could see the view and roll down like a goofy kid. And so I had to motivate myself. So I kept taking the Gatorade bottle and I'd throw it up the sand dune a little ways. Then I would walk up the dune, take a sip, and then I would take the Gatorade bottle and I'd throw it up the sand dune a little further up the road. And honestly, that's what vision looks like. If you're like, man, I just want to get to the top of this sand dune, yearly goals function that way. Yeah. Throw that Gatorade bottle a little bit ahead of you where you're at, walk up there, celebrate, and then throw it up again and get a little bit further.
Yeah, great analogy. You're quite the overachiever.
I finally got to the other kids that were more athletic, got up there in 2 seconds, which is fine. But and kept going back up again and again. I went up one time and I was like, I'm good. Rolled down that thing and was done. But because it was real hot. But okay, so let's recap here. Our first lens then is mission. So recap, just sort of a quick sentence, 15 seconds there, AJ. Applying that mission filter is what?
Right. Making and maturing disciples of Jesus Christ. That we got to keep the main thing, and make sure that all of our ministries are pointing us either directly or within very, very few steps towards that goal.
Without going into the weeds, and this is the most complicated filter here,
right? Yeah.
But the discipleship pathway filter. What does that look like? Again, really, really simple. If someone got confused, let's clear them up right here. What does that mean?
Yeah, so we need a very few small handful of primary things that we're doing as a church together, and the ministries need to fit very nicely and cleanly and effectively into these few steps that we call discipleship pathway. So that is our second filter. If we look at the ministry, the outcomes of it, and it's not helping us reach those step goals, then it may be an ineffective ministry.
Right. And we'll talk next week about what to do when we have an ineffective ministry.
Yeah, right.
And then the third one is vision. So a couple sentences.
Finally, vision. So again, when we look at one of our ministries in the church, and these are sort of progressive filters as well. Making mature disciples, yes or no? How well does it fit within our discipleship pathway to accomplish the goals of that particular step? And is it also helping us achieve our short-term, mid-range, or long-term vision goals that we have clearly articulated?
Oh, that's good. Really good. Really great stuff, AJ. Thank you so much for writing this week's article and helping us think through some simple checkpoints. Not easy to think through them, but certainly simple enough to start thinking through them. Really appreciate it. Listen, if you guys thank you so much for listening to today's episode 13 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. You can get today's show notes at malfersgroup.com/13 to read AJ's article that goes along with all the things we've just been talking about. Appreciate you subscribing, sharing this with a friend in ministry, and we'll talk to you next time.